Hi, my name is Kiana, and today I will make my individual screencast of this web project. So I can start by talking about HTTP only cookies, like we also talked about in the project screencast. If we go to backend Django projects and URLs, we can see that we are using the REST framework simple gvt.views package. From that package we are importing 3 different views to handle the authentication part of the project. So we are importing token obtain pair view, token refresh view, and also token verify view. Yeah, so the front end will make an API call to the path API/token and when it wants to obtain an GVT token from the backend, and it will hit the token obtain pair view and it will return a refresh and access token to the front end. If the front end wants to get a new access token, then it will make a API call to the API/token/refresh, and the token refresh view will return a new access and refresh token. So the token refresh view will only return a new access and refresh token if the API call attaches a valid refresh token. Otherwise, the token refresh view will return an error status code. So we can go to the settings file. Here, we have decided to set the access token lifetime to 5 minutes and the refresh token lifetime to 1 day, as these are usual values that are used in projects. And if you look at the code row 162 and 163, you can see that we rotate the refresh tokens when a user has used it, but we also blacklist the refresh token for extra security. Yeah, now if we go back to this file again, so lastly, if the front end wants to verify an access token, then it will make an API call to the path API/token/verify, and the token verify view will check the access token and return a appropriate HTTP status code. Yeah, now we can go into the front end sources, API, account, and login. Yes, if you look from the code row 24, you can see that we set a cookie in the browser for the user, which will contain the returned access and refresh tokens. And we also set the max age for the tokens, and if the current environment we are running is not the development, then we will require the connection to be HTTPS, otherwise HTTP. And we also set the same site option to strict to mitigate CSRF attacks. Yeah, I will now talk about the API proxy that we have created. So if we go into user.tsx, this file that we are currently in is the API proxy, and this endpoint handles when the front end wants to get on user. So the Next.js app will send requests to the API proxy, which will parse the HTTP only cookie. If you see here at row 11 and 12, we parse the attached cookie and retrieve the access token. If there exists no access token, then we return 401 HTTP status code with the error user is unauthorized to make this request. So if the user is authorized, we will send an API call to the backend with the access token, and then we will check what kind of status is returned. If 200, then return user data. If an error occurs, we return the error message. And we have created our own error parser method to handle error messages from the backend. So I can show you that one too. If we go into helper functions, it should be here. Yeah. So the error parser is a helper function that parses the error message that is received from the payload from the backend into a more appropriate format. Code row 9 and to 11 is to handle when the backend returns a string error message, and code row 12 to 14 is to handle when the backend returns a list with errors. Then we only parse the first error message. And the code row 20 to 27 is just to handle edge cases. Yeah. Now we will talk a bit about our Axios interceptor that we have created. So if we go into Axios in this file, here we are using the package Axios slash bindestrek auth bindestrek refresh to handle when an API call returns 401. If we look at code row 11, we see that when status code 401 is returned from the backend, we will make an API call to API account slash refresh to retrieve a new access and refresh token, and it will then send a new API call to the backend. So to clarify, this intercept sends API calls to API slash account slash refresh if the backend returns status code 401, and otherwise it will do nothing. This can be customized, but we chose it to only handle 401 status code. And this is to avoid having the code 401 checks and resending API calls. This makes the code more readable and more clean, and also it makes more modular code. Yeah, and now we will talk about Docker. So we go to backend and the Docker file. With our Docker file, we can build an image, which in this case is a Python image, which will host the container of our backend. So the two containers are created in the Docker Compose UML file, which I will also talk about shortly. But as you can see, we set the environment variables up here. We set the work directory and we install the dependencies for the backend code. So if we go to this file, in this file we have two containers, one that's called web, which is the Django project, and another one that's called DB, which is the Postgres database. Yeah, and now I will talk about our GitLab pipeline that we have used in this project. So we can go to the GitLab file. So we are using GitLab pipeline to make it more smooth to push our code to Heroku and Vercel. And we are running 3 stages: deployment to backend, installing and building front end, and also deployment to front end. And we are getting the environment keys from Heroku and Vercel, and some environment keys are Heroku API key and the Heroku app name. Yeah. And now I will talk about how we have used Redux toolkits in our project. So if we go back to front end, to Redux, slices and auth.tsx, we can go to, we can go here. So if we look at the create slice method, we can see that it is a method that accepts an initial state, an object full of reducer functions, and a slice name, and it automatically generates action creators and action types that correspond to the reducers and state. So we have reset registered as one reducer to be called after one visits the login page. The state registered makes it possible for us to check if someone has made a new account and direct them to the login page. But this needs to be reset, otherwise the register page will always direct them to the login page. The reducer show snack bar is used to update the state that handle showing messages to the user. And close snack bar reducer is, it speaks for itself. And then we have the reset reducer that resets the Redux store. This one is called when a user logs out, and this is to lessen the risk of bugs happening when a user has 2 accounts and uses the same browser. And lastly, we have extra reducers that handle different functions of the Next.js app. For example, registering user, login user, and also more. Yes. We can go up here. This Redux action delete friend is called by the front end when the user wants to delete a friend. This is done by calling dispatch delete friend. This code is pretty straightforward. We send an API call to our API proxy that handles deleting a friend. If for 200 status is returned, then we update the current friends list and get other users. But if an error occurs, then we call the show snack bar reducer, who will show a snack bar to the user. I can show you the calendar page. This is our calendar page, and I can talk about this event clicked function, for example. So this function goes through the Redux state events. It's those events that contain all the events a user has in his calendar. and if the IDs match, then it is saved. If we don't find a matching event, we show a snack bar to the user with an error message. Otherwise, we show a model view with the information about the event. Yeah, I think this is all for me.